The guitar strings hummed under calloused fingers as the Arizona dawn painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. Colonel James Hartwell sat on the roof of the officers' quarters, his back against the ventilation unit, his eyes closed against the rising sun. The melody was simple, almost fragile in the desert silence. Bossa Nova, Sarah's favorite. 6 years. 6 years since cancer had taken her, and still his fingers found this song every morning. The girl from Ipanema. She used to hum it while making coffee, her bare feet padding across their kitchen floor in that little house outside Tucson. Before the diagnosis. Before the deployments he couldn't cancel. Before the empty bed and the folded flag and the guilt that sat in his chest like a stone. The last note faded into the dry air. Jim opened his eyes, 58 years of living etched into the lines around them, and watched the desert come alive below. The Galactic Integration Academy sprawled across 10,000 acres of what used to be restricted Air Force land. Now it housed something stranger than experimental aircraft. Now it housed the future, whether Earth was ready or not. Footsteps on the metal ladder. Heavy, deliberate. Jim didn't need to turn around. "You're going to fall off this roof one day, brother." Dr. Robert Martinez's voice carried the easy concern of 30 years of friendship. "Then I'll have to explain to your daughter why her old man died doing his morning concert for the ghosts." Jim set the guitar aside, vintage mahogany catching the light. Sarah bought it for him on their 20th anniversary, 3 months before the diagnosis. "Morning, Bob." Martinez settled onto the roof with a grunt, knees popping. 65 looked good on him, silver at the temples, eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He held 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. "Figured you'd be up here. Today's the day, right?" Jim took the offered cup. Black, no sugar. The way he'd learned to drink it in the cockpit of an F-16, back when the sky was the only unknown they had to worry about. 6 years. "I know." Martinez sipped his coffee, gaze sweeping the compound below. Academy was just breaking ground when Sarah passed. Now look at it. 300 cadets from 40 different worlds. Air traffic control that has to account for species that breathe methane. A cafeteria that serves food for biology we're still trying to understand. She would have loved seeing this. She would have hated that I missed her last 8 months for it. The words came out flat, factual. Jim had stopped feeling the sharp edge of that particular guilt somewhere around year 3. Now it was just there, a constant weight, like the titanium rod in his left leg from the ejection seat that saved his life and ended his flying career. Martinez didn't argue. They'd been through this too many times. Instead, he pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "This came through on the secure channel this morning. General Stone wants to see you at 0800. Jim checked his watch. 20 minutes. What's the old man want? Diplomatic duty. Martinez's tone carried a warning. The Vexari delegation lands today. Ambassador level. Integration treaty negotiations for the next 6 weeks. Stone's got the flu, can't do the meet and greet himself. Jim felt his jaw tighten. So he wants me to play chauffeur for some crystalline bureaucrat who probably thinks Earth is a backwater that got lucky with warp drive. Martinez stood, knees protesting again. "You know that's not fair. The Vexari have been our strongest allies in the integration process. And this isn't just some bureaucrat. This is Ambassador Lyra Vel'shara. She's practically royalty in their system. Former military, lost her husband in the border wars, spent the last decade building bridges between species that wanted to kill each other a generation ago." Sounds like a saint. Jim rose, guitar in hand. Still doesn't change the fact that I'd rather be anywhere else. "I know, but Stone asked for you specifically. Said you're the only one he trusts to keep her alive." That stopped Jim cold. Keep her alive. Martinez's expression went grim. "There's been chatter. Extremist groups, both human and non-human, who don't want this treaty to succeed. The Vexari ambassador is a target. High value, symbolic. You're not just a liaison, Jim. You're her bodyguard. 24/7 for the next 6 weeks. The guitar case felt heavier in Jim's hand. He thought about his plans for the day. Teach 2 classes on tactical flight formations. Review personnel files. Maybe drive out to Sedona in the evening, to the little bar where he and Sarah used to watch the sunset. Alone, the way he'd been for 6 years. I didn't sign up for babysitting. You signed up to serve. Martinez's voice carried the weight of old authority, the command presence that had made him a hell of a field surgeon in 3 different wars. This is serving. The integration is bigger than any of us, Jim. Bigger than our comfort zones. Jim looked at his friend, really looked at him. Saw the same thing he saw in the mirror every morning. A man trying to find purpose in a universe that had moved on while he stood still. When does she land? Phoenix Sky Harbor, 1000 hours. You've got time to shower and pretend you give a damn. Jim descended the ladder, guitar case slung across his back. The morning was warming up fast, the way desert mornings did. By noon, it would be 90 degrees, and by tonight the Sonoran Desert would glow under stars that now held meanings his grandfather could never have imagined. He showered in the officers' quarters, the water scalding, trying to burn away the stiffness in muscles that protested more with each passing year. The scar tissue on his left shoulder, souvenir from the crash that ended his flying days, was a pale topography of what used to be. He'd been 42 when the ejection seat fired. Sarah had been waiting at the hospital. Had held his hand through the surgeries, the physical therapy, the depression that followed when they told him he'd never fly combat again. And then, just when he'd found a new purpose training the next generation, she'd gotten sick, and he'd been deployed. Integration liaison to the Centauri negotiations. 8 months of shuttle diplomacy while his wife wasted away in a hospital bed 70 million miles from Earth. Marcus had called him on the quantum link. "Dad, you need to come home. Mom's asking for you." And he'd said, "I can't, son. We're at a critical point in the negotiations. If I leave now, 3 years of work collapses." She died while he was explaining the finer points of trade tariffs to a species that communicated through color-shifting skin patterns. He'd made it back in time for the funeral. Had stood in his dress blues under the Arizona sun, accepting the folded flag, knowing that his son would never quite forgive him, knowing he would never quite forgive himself. The dress uniform hung in his closet, crisp and ready. But today wasn't a dress uniform day. Today was tactical gear, subtle body armor under a casual jacket, sidearm concealed at his hip. If he was going to be a bodyguard, he'd do it right. General William Stone's office occupied the top floor of the command center, all windows and desert views. The general himself looked like hell, skin gray, eyes watery, a box of tissues on his desk. 70 years old and still refused to retire, even when the flu knocked him flat. "Hartwell," Stone's voice was gravel. "Thanks for coming." "Sir," Jim stood at parade rest out of habit. "At ease, Colonel, this isn't formal." Stone gestured to a chair, then immediately regretted it, coughing into a tissue. "Christ, I'm too old for this. Look, you know why you're here." Ambassador sitting. Stone managed a weak smile. "In your typically colorful phrasing, yes, but it's more than that." He pulled up a holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional representation of a being that made Jim's breath catch despite himself. Lyra Vel'shara stood about 5'8" in the image, her body composed of what looked like living crystal. Silicon-based life, the briefing notes explained, formed through geological processes humans were still trying to fully understand. Her surface refracted light in complex patterns, creating an effect like stained glass given consciousness. The blue hues shifted and flowed as she moved, bioluminescent, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human aesthetics, and everything to do with pure alien grace. She's been working on Earth-Vexari integration for 3 years, Stone continued. Moderate, reasonable, respected by both sides, which makes her dangerous to the extremists. We've intercepted 3 separate plots to kill her. 2 human supremacist groups, 1 Chronite faction that sees any alliance with Earth as weakness. Why is she coming here if it's that dangerous? Because the treaty won't get done anywhere else. Earth-Vexari relations are the cornerstone of the whole integration framework. If this falls apart, we're looking at economic collapse, possible military conflict, and a return to the isolation that almost destroyed us during the resource wars. Stone pulled up another image. This one showed a modest compound on the edge of the academy grounds. Secure housing, environmental controls, the works. She'll live there. You'll live in the adjacent unit. Wherever she goes, you go. Every meeting, every meal, every diplomatic function. You are her shadow for the next 42 days. Jim studied the compound, the tactical part of his brain already mapping sight lines, entry points, vulnerabilities. What about her own security detail? Coming with her, a Chronite named Kale Dorvan, former military, loyal to her personally, but he's not familiar with Earth. You are. You know the threats, the terrain, the cultural flashpoints. You're the primary. And if I say no? Stone's eyes, watery from fever, still held command. Then I'm asking the wrong man. The James Hartwell I flew with in the Gulf, the one who pulled me out of a burning cockpit in Kandahar, that man never said no when people needed him. Low blow, sir. Truth, Colonel. Stone's expression softened. Look, I know this isn't what you want. Hell, I know you've been going through the motions here for years, teaching classes while your heart's somewhere else. But this matters. She matters. The integration is the only thing standing between humanity and another century of war. Jim thought about his guitar on the roof, about the empty house in Tucson he couldn't bring himself to sell, about his son, Marcus, who called once a month out of obligation and spoke to him like a stranger. When does she land? 2 hours. Stone slid a data pad across the desk, full briefing materials, her background, her mission parameters, threat assessments. Memorize it. And Jim, try to make a good impression. The Vexari value courtesy above almost everything else. They're formal, protocol-driven. Don't be your usual charming self. I'll try to contain my natural warmth, sir. Phoenix Sky Harbor International had changed in the years since first contact. The new terminals could accommodate species with wildly different atmospheric requirements. Gates opened onto boarding tubes that could shift between oxygen, methane, nitrogen-heavy mixes, even hard vacuum for the crystalline remnant traders who lived in ships and never set foot on planets. Jim stood in the VIP receiving area, data pad reviewed and discarded. He didn't need notes to remember that Ambassador Lyra Vel'shara was 52 years old by Vexari reckoning, which translated roughly to the same in Earth years. That she'd been married to a military hero named Thorin Velkar, who died saving a human unit during the border conflicts. That she had a daughter, Zara, serving in the Galactic Fleet. That she spoke 8 languages, held degrees in xenopolitical theory and ancient Earth literature, and had a reputation for being as brilliant as she was difficult. The arrival board showed her shuttle touching down. Jim checked his sidearm, concealed but ready. Scanned the crowd. 3 potential threats within visual range, all being monitored by Academy security. 1 human carrying a sign about keeping Earth pure. 2 Dravixian traders whose body language suggested agitation. Nothing immediate. The gate opened. A wave of cooler air preceded the delegation. Carbon dioxide enriched, Jim's briefing had explained. Vexari couldn't breathe standard Earth atmosphere for extended periods. They'd have environmental suits, breathers, probably a portable life support system for the ambassador. The security team came first. 4 Vexari guards, their crystalline bodies encased in what looked like liquid armor. Then a figure that could only be Kale Dorvan. 8 feet of muscle and gray skin, a chronite in formal diplomatic dress that did nothing to hide his warrior's build. His eyes swept the terminal with professional paranoia. And then Lyra Vel'shara. The briefing images hadn't prepared him. She moved with a grace that seemed to defy physics, each step precise, controlled. Her crystalline form caught the terminal's light and transformed it, sending cascades of blue luminescence across the walls. She wore what Jim's data pad had called a ceremonial integration suit, something between armor and formal wear that left her arms and face exposed. The face was the hardest part to process. Humanoid enough to trigger recognition, alien enough to remind you that parallel evolution was a cosmic joke. Eyes like cut sapphires. No hair, but elegant ridges that swept back from her forehead in patterns that might have been decorative or functional or both. She saw him, stopped. For a moment, those sapphire eyes studied him with an intensity that made Jim want to check if his fly was open. Kale moved beside her, protective. "Ambassador, this is our contact." Jim stepped forward, tried to remember the Vexari greeting he'd practiced. "Ambassador Vel'shara, welcome to Earth. I'm Colonel James Hartwell. I'll be your liaison during your stay." Her voice was unexpected, musical but with an undertone like wind through crystal caves. "Colonel, your pronunciation is adequate, but you placed the stress on the wrong syllable of my name. It's Vel'shara, not Vel'shara." Jim felt his jaw tighten. "Adequate. Right. My apologies, Ambassador. I'll endeavor to be more than adequate going forward." Something flickered in her expression. Amusement, irritation, impossible to tell. "I appreciate the effort, Colonel. Most humans don't bother with our linguistic conventions at all. Now, if you could show us to our accommodations. The atmospheric composition here is," she paused, searching for a word, challenging. "Of course." Jim gestured toward the exit. "We have vehicles waiting. Climate-controlled, CO2 enriched. About a 40-minute drive to the Academy." The motorcade was 3 vehicles. Lead car with Academy security, middle car for the ambassador and her immediate detail, tail car with additional Vexari guards. Jim rode in the middle vehicle, across from Lyra and Kale, trying not to stare as the ambassador adjusted her breathing apparatus, a subtle device that fit against her face like a second skin. The desert rolled past outside. October in Arizona meant the worst of the summer heat had broken, but it was still warm, the landscape painted in ochres and reds, and the defiant green of desert plants that refused to die. "It's beautiful," Lyra said suddenly. "Your planet. I've studied it for years, but seeing it is different." Jim glanced at her. She was looking out the window with something like wonder. "Most off-worlders find it too dry. Most off-worlders lack imagination." She turned those sapphire eyes on him. "Do you know what Vexar looks like, Colonel?" "Can't say I do." "Ice, crystal formations 1,000 meters high. Atmospheres so cold that carbon dioxide snow falls like rain. Beautiful, but harsh. Your desert reminds me of home in that way. Life insisting on itself despite everything." Jim found himself reassessing his initial impression. There was something in her voice, a weariness maybe, or a loneliness that he recognized because he carried it himself. "How long since you've been home?" he asked. 3 years. The diplomatic circuit doesn't allow for much leave. My daughter sends me images sometimes. The crystal forests near our family estate, the aurora that plays across the nitrogen sky." She paused. "I miss it, but this work matters more than my nostalgia." The academy compound rose from the desert like a small city. Training facilities, housing blocks, the central command tower that caught the sun like a beacon. Jim directed the driver to the secure housing unit, a low-slung building designed for maximum defensibility and minimum visibility. "Your quarters," he announced as they pulled up. "Environmental controls are set to Vexari standard. CO2 at 40%, temperature at 20 Celsius, humidity at 15%. If you need adjustments, there's a control panel by the door." Lyra emerged from the vehicle with Kale's assistance. The desert sun hit her crystalline form, and for a moment she blazed like a stained glass window given life. Then she stumbled slightly, catching herself on Kale's arm. "Ambassador," concern in the Chronite's deep voice. "I'm fine, just the atmospheric transition." She straightened, but Jim caught the slight tremor in her voice. Nothing that a few hours in proper air won't fix. Jim filed that away. Weakness, illness, or just the normal adjustment any traveler experienced in a new environment. "Your quarters are through here." He led them inside, into a space that had been transformed from standard military housing into something approaching alien luxury. The furniture was minimal, geometric, designed for a physiology that didn't sit the way humans did. The walls were smooth, white, designed to reflect rather than absorb light. And the air, Jim noticed immediately, was different. Thicker, almost, with a sharp tang that made his lungs protest. Lyra breathed deeply, and the tension visibly left her frame. "Home, or close enough. Thank you, Colonel." "My quarters are adjacent." Jim pointed to a door that connected the two units. "That stays locked unless there's an emergency or you request otherwise. You need anything, use the comm. I'll be monitoring 24/7. "How comforting." Her tone was dry. A bodyguard who never sleeps. A bodyguard who takes his job seriously. Their eyes met, held. Jim saw intelligence there and pride and something else he couldn't quite name. A challenge, maybe, or a warning. Kale stepped between them, subtle but deliberate. "The ambassador needs rest, Colonel. Perhaps we can continue orientation in the morning." "Of course." Jim stepped back. "There's a briefing packet on the table. Covers academy layout, security protocols, contact information. Dinner is delivered at 1800 if you want it, or the commissary is open if you prefer to eat out." "I'll take delivery, thank you." Lyra moved toward what must have been the bedroom. "And Colonel, your concern is noted and appreciated, but I've survived 3 assassination attempts, a political coup, and a marriage to a Chronite military commander. I think I can handle Arizona." The door closed behind her. Jim found himself standing in the living area with Kale, who was studying him with the kind of intensity that suggested he was calculating exactly how much force it would take to break Jim in half. "She doesn't need protecting," the Chronite said quietly. "But I appreciate that you'll try. Just understand something, human. The ambassador is the most important person in my life. If anything happens to her while she's under your watch, there won't be enough pieces of you left to bury." Jim met his gaze without flinching. "Then we're on the same page, because I don't fail twice." Kale's expression flickered. Almost respect. Almost, "What do you mean twice?" Jim didn't answer. Just turned and walked to the connecting door, keyed in his security code, and stepped into his own quarters. Smaller than Lyra's, functional rather than comfortable. He'd lived in worse. He'd lived in worse while Sarah was dying and he was negotiating trade agreements. The guitar case sat in the corner where he'd left it that morning. Jim picked it up, carried it to the small balcony that overlooked the desert. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in those impossible colors that Arizona did better than anywhere else on Earth. Copper and gold giving way to purple and indigo. He sat, opened the case, and started to play. Not bossa nova this time, something else. A melody he didn't quite recognize until he was halfway through. Sarah had hummed it in the hospital those last few weeks. Something about stars and chances and the love that outlasts everything. His fingers found the chords, and he played into the dying light, alone in a desert that suddenly felt very crowded. Next door, through walls that were supposed to be soundproof, Lyra Vel'shara stood at her own window and listened. The music was simple, almost primitive by Vexari standards, but there was something in it that made her crystalline body resonate in sympathy. Sorrow, yes, but also something else. A stubborn refusal to let the sorrow win. She thought about Thorin, about the 10 years since his death, about the loneliness that felt like physics, like gravity, like something she'd carry forever. The human's guitar fell silent. Lyra pressed one hand against the glass and watched the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. Strange stars, in a strange configuration above a strange world. But stars nonetheless. And she'd learned long ago that stars were the same everywhere. Distant, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to the small creatures who looked up at them and dared to hope. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Treaty negotiations, diplomatic dances, the careful choreography of bringing two incompatible species into something resembling harmony. But tonight, she allowed herself to be tired, to miss her daughter, to wonder if she'd made a mistake coming here, to this beautiful, hostile world where the air itself was slowly poisoning her. The medical scans had been clear. 3 months maximum exposure to Earth's atmosphere before her respiratory system would begin to crystallize. After that, suffocation. Slow, inevitable, irreversible. The diplomatic corps didn't know. Her daughter didn't know. Only her personal physician, sworn to secrecy, and Kale, who'd argued against this mission with every fiber of his being. But the treaty mattered more than one life, even hers. Lyra turned from the window, began the evening meditation that would help her body process the oxygen overload, and tried not to think about the human next door, with his sad eyes and his sadder music, and the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. It would be a long 6 weeks. Jim woke at 05:30, muscle memory and decades of military discipline dragging him from dreams he wouldn't remember. The guitar still lay across his lap, the strings imprinted into his palm. His back protested as he stood, joints cracking, a symphony of aging that no amount of exercise could fully silence. Coffee first, then the morning ritual. But when he stepped onto the roof, guitar in hand, he found he wasn't alone. Lyra Vel'shara stood at the far edge, her crystalline form catching the pre-dawn light and transforming it into something that looked like captured starlight. She wasn't wearing the environmental suit, just stood there in what might have been night clothes, her body language suggesting she thought she was alone. Jim almost retreated, but something in her posture stopped him. The way she held herself, utterly still, facing east where the sun would rise. There was a ritual quality to it that he recognized. He sat in his usual spot, quiet as he could manage, set the guitar aside, waited. The sun breached the horizon, and Lyra, she began to glow. Not metaphorically, literally. Her crystalline structure caught the light and amplified it, refracted it, until she stood haloed in prismatic fire. And as she glowed, she began to move. Slow, precise movements that might have been Tai Chi or might have been something uniquely Vexari, a meditation in motion. Jim watched, transfixed. It was the most beautiful thing he'd seen in 6 years. The dance ended as the sun cleared the horizon fully. Lyra's glow faded to her normal blue luminescence, and then she turned and saw him, and her whole body went rigid. "Colonel Hartwell, I didn't realize you were there." Jim stood, feeling suddenly like an intruder. "I apologize, Ambassador. This is usually my private time. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Your private time?" She looked at the guitar, understanding dawning. "Ah, your morning concert. Kale mentioned it." Of course he had. Nothing got past the Chronite's surveillance. "I'll go," Jim said. "Leave you to it." No, Lyra moved toward him, and he noticed for the first time that she was breathing hard, struggling slightly. "It's your roof. I'm the intruder. She paused. I needed to see the sunrise. On Vexar, our sun is dimmer, bluer. This light, it feeds us in ways I can't quite explain." Jim understood that better than she knew. "Isn't the atmosphere hurting you?" A flicker of surprise in those sapphire eyes. "You're observant." "Occupational hazard." Jim gestured to the guitar. "I was going to play. You're welcome to stay if you want." "I wouldn't want to intrude on your grief." That stopped him cold. "Excuse me." "Your music last night. I could hear it through the walls. I may not understand human musical theory, but I understand the sound of mourning. You play for someone you lost." Jim felt exposed in a way he hadn't since the funeral. "My wife, Sarah, she died 6 years ago today." Lyra's expression softened, became something that transcended species. "I'm sorry. My husband has been gone 10 years. The anniversaries never get easier, do they?" "No, they don't." They stood in the growing light, two people from different worlds, united by the simple arithmetic of loss. Jim found himself speaking without planning to. "I wasn't there when she died. I was off-world, negotiating with the Centauri delegation. Thought the mission was too important to abandon. By the time I got back, by the time I held her hand, she was already gone." Lyra nodded slowly. "Thorin died saving a human unit during the border conflicts. I was at home, raising our daughter, safe while he threw himself between your people and certain death. I got the notification 6 hours after he passed. Never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell him that I was proud, that I understood why he made that choice." Jim sat down on the roof, suddenly tired, gestured for her to join him. She did, settling with that alien grace, leaving a careful distance between them. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Being proud, I mean. Some people would be angry." "Oh, I was angry. For years. Anger at him for dying. At your people for living. At myself for not being there. But anger is exhausting, Colonel. And eventually, you either let it destroy you or you find a way to transmute it into something else." "What did you transmute it into?" This, her gesture encompassed the academy, the desert, Earth itself. If Thorin died believing humans and Vexari could build something together, then I owe it to his memory to prove him right. This treaty, these negotiations, they're my way of honoring what he sacrificed." Jim looked at her, really looked at her. Saw past the alien physiology to the person underneath. Someone who'd turned grief into purpose. Who'd chosen to build instead of destroy. He searched for words, that's brave. "It's survival, Colonel. The alternative is to drown in sorrow. And I have a daughter who needs her mother to be more than a monument to grief." The sun was fully up now, the desert coming alive with heat and light. Jim picked up the guitar, fingers finding the strings almost of their own accord. "May I?" he asked. "Please." He played, not bossa nova, not the sad songs he usually chose, something else. A folk melody his father had taught him, about travelers and home and the roads that lead both away and back. His fingers weren't as quick as they used to be, and he missed a note here and there, but the melody held. When he finished, Lyra was looking at him with something that might have been respect. "That was beautiful. What's it called?" "Shenandoah. It's old. American folk song about a river and a traveler who has to leave someone he loves. We have similar songs on Vexar, about the crystal migrations, when families must separate to follow the mineral seams, about the ache of distance." She paused. Music seems to be the one language that translates perfectly. Jim set the guitar aside. Maybe that's the secret to this whole integration thing. Less talking, more playing. If only diplomacy worked that way. Lyra stood, and he noticed the slight tremor in her legs. I should return to my quarters. Big day ahead. Treaty overview at 1000, facility tour at 1400, formal dinner with your academy leadership tonight. You okay? Jim rose with her, concerned. You're shaking. Fine, just the oxygen exposure. I need to limit my time in unfiltered atmosphere. How long can you last? Here, unfiltered, about an hour before the strain becomes dangerous. She saw his expression. Don't worry, Colonel. I'm not fragile, I just have to be careful. Jim wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that careful wasn't the same as safe, that she was slowly poisoning herself for a treaty that might not even succeed. But he'd learned over the years that some people couldn't be saved from their own convictions. I'll be ready at 0930 to escort you to the briefing. I look forward to it. Her tone suggested she looked forward to root canal more, but she managed something that might have been a smile. And Colonel, thank you for sharing your music. It's been a long time since I heard someone play for the joy of it rather than the performance. She left before he could respond, moving across the roof with that impossible grace, leaving Jim standing in the morning sun with his guitar and his thoughts. Bob Martinez found him still there 20 minutes later, staring at the horizon like it held answers. You're up here a lot lately. Jim didn't turn, every morning for 6 years. Today feels different, though. Bob settled beside him, groaning theatrically. My knees hate me. You meet your alien ambassador yet? Met her. And she's complicated. Bob laughed. Brother, in my experience, anyone worth knowing is complicated. The simple ones are usually hiding something. She's dying. That got Bob's attention. What? Jim explained what he'd observed. The trembling, the breathing difficulty, the careful rationing of time in Earth's atmosphere. Bob's expression went grim. Silicon-based life and oxygen-rich environments. Yeah, that's a problem. CO2 is their oxygen equivalent. Too much O2 and their respiratory systems start to crystallize, like emphysema, but faster. 3 months of exposure max before permanent damage sets in. She knows, Jim said quietly. She's doing it anyway. For the treaty. For the treaty. Bob was quiet for a long moment. Sounds like someone else I know. Someone who prioritized mission over everything else, even when it cost him everything that mattered. Jim felt that land like a punch. That's different. Is it? Bob stood, knees protesting again. I'm just saying, Jim. Maybe before you judge her for dying on her feet, remember you've been doing the same thing for 6 years. Just slower. Just sadder. He left Jim on the roof, alone with the truth of that. The morning briefing was held in Conference Room A, a space designed to accommodate multiple species. Variable gravity zones, atmospheric controls, furniture that could reconfigure for different physiologies. Jim stood at the back, bodyguard posture, while Lyra took the center seat with Kale beside her and Academy brass arrayed around the table. General Stone, looking marginally better than yesterday, presided via hologram from his sick bed. Ambassador Vel'shara, welcome to the Galactic Integration Academy. We're honored to host these negotiations. Lyra inclined her head with perfect diplomatic grace. The honor is mine, General. Earth has made remarkable progress in the 12 years since first contact. This academy is proof that integration isn't just policy, it's practice. The presentation began, slides showing the economic interdependence that had developed. Human manufacturing feeding Vexari technology. Vexari crystal engineering revolutionizing human computing. Trade routes that now connected Earth to 37 systems. All of it fragile, all of it dependent on treaties that needed renewal every 5 years. The current accords expire in 60 days, the briefing officer explained. Without ratification of the new treaty framework, we revert to provisional status. Trade restrictions, travel limitations, potential military posturing from isolationist factions. Hence the urgency, Lyra added. My government and yours have 6 weeks to negotiate terms that satisfy moderates on both sides while giving extremists no ammunition. She pulled up a holographic display of her own. These are the key sticking points. Cultural exchange mandates that some Earth factions see as forced assimilation. Technology sharing agreements that some Vexari factions see as giving away strategic advantages. And underlying it all, the question of whether two species this different can truly coexist, or whether we're delaying an inevitable conflict. The room went quiet. Jim watched faces around the table, saw doubt, saw fear, saw the weight of what failure would mean. Ambassador, one of the Academy's political officers, spoke up. Do you believe coexistence is possible? Truly. Lyra's gaze swept the room, landed briefly on Jim. I believe it's necessary. Whether it's possible depends on whether we're willing to sacrifice our comfort for our children's future. She paused. My husband believed it was possible. He died proving it. I owe it to his memory to finish what he started. The briefing continued for another 2 hours. Technical details, negotiation timelines, security protocols. Jim absorbed it all, the tactical part of his brain mapping out vulnerabilities, potential threats, contingencies. When it finally ended, Lyra rose with visible effort. Kale was at her side instantly, offering support she refused with a subtle gesture. Jim intercepted her at the door. You need to get back to your quarters. Filtered atmosphere. I'm aware of my limitations, Colonel. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you just pushed yourself through 2 hours in an oxygen-rich room when you can barely handle 1 hour unfiltered. Lyra's eyes flashed. What I do with my body is my concern, not yours. Wrong. My job is to keep you alive. That includes alive from environmental hazards. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Kale watched, calculating, ready to intervene. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice ice. Fine, escort me back. Do your job, Colonel, just don't expect me to thank you for it. The walk back to the quarters was silent, the desert heat building as midday approached. Jim kept pace beside her, watching for signs of distress. Saw the way her steps became less certain, the way her luminescence dimmed. They were 50 yards from the building when she stumbled. Jim caught her before Kale could react, his hands on her arms, surprised by the warmth. She was hot to the touch, feverish, her crystalline structure radiating heat like a malfunctioning reactor. Ambassador. I'm fine, but her voice was weak, just need to sit. Like hell, Jim swept her up, ignoring Kale's protest, ignoring her own startled exclamation. She weighed less than he expected, and he was grateful for the physical training that kept him fit despite the years. He carried her through the door, into the filtered atmosphere of her quarters, set her gently on the geometric furniture that served as a couch. Lyra's breathing was ragged, her glow flickering. Get Dr. Martinez, Jim snapped at Kale. Now. The Chronite hesitated, loyalty warring with logic. Then he was gone, moving with surprising speed. Jim knelt beside Lyra, his hand on her shoulder, feeling the heat radiating through her. Hey, stay with me, talk to me. About what? Her voice was barely a whisper. Anything. Your daughter, your home, the weather, just stay conscious. Lyra's eyes focused on him with effort. You're very bossy, Colonel. It's been mentioned. Jim allowed himself a small smile, usually right before someone thanks me for saving their life. I haven't, she took a labored breath, thanked you yet. You will, when you're better. Her hand found his, and despite the heat, he held on. "Why do you care? We just met. I've been nothing but difficult." Jim thought about Sarah, about all the ways he'd failed to care when it mattered, about the promise he'd made over her grave that he'd never make that mistake again. "Because," he said quietly, "someone has to. And right now, that someone is me." Lyra's eyes held his, and for a moment, the barriers between them, the differences of species and history and pain, they fell away. Just two people, both broken in their own ways, both trying to survive one more day. Dr. Martinez burst through the door with kale and a medical kit, moved Jim aside with practiced efficiency, and began scanning Lyra with instruments that hummed and beeped. Oxygen toxicity, he confirmed. Her silicate structures are beginning to denature. She needs pure CO2 environment for at least 12 hours, maybe more. "Set it up," Jim ordered. "Whatever she needs." Martinez worked quickly, converting the bedroom into a medical chamber. Atmosphere composition shifted, became unbreathable for humans. Jim watched through the clear door as Lyra was settled into the space, her body slowly regaining its normal luminescence. "She'll be okay," Martinez said quietly. "But Jim, this is serious. She can't keep doing this. 3 months max exposure to Earth atmosphere is the absolute limit. After that, the damage becomes irreversible." "How long has she been here?" 24 hours. "And she's already in this condition." Martinez's expression was grim, which means she was already compromised before she arrived. Whatever condition she's in, it's chronic, and probably terminal. Jim felt something cold settle in his chest. Terminal. Without intervention, yeah. A year, maybe 2, and that's if she leaves Earth immediately. But she won't. No, Martinez packed up his equipment. She won't. Because she's a true believer, and true believers don't count the cost until the bill comes due. Through the clear door, Jim watched Lyra sleep, her body finally at rest in an atmosphere that wouldn't kill her, and realized with absolute certainty that the next 6 weeks were going to be the hardest assignment of his life. Not because of the security threats or the political complexities, but because somewhere between this morning's sunrise and this afternoon's crisis, he'd started to care. And caring, as he'd learned the hard way, was the most dangerous thing a man could do. The sun set over the Arizona desert in its usual spectacular fashion, painting the sky in colors that no amount of time could make ordinary. Jim sat on the balcony of his quarters, guitar untouched beside him, watching the light die and thinking about beginnings and endings. Next door, in her climate-controlled chamber, Lyra Vel'shara watched the same sunset through filtered glass and thought about sacrifice. About her daughter, who would grow up either in a united galaxy or a divided one, depending on what happened in the next 6 weeks. About Thorin, who'd believed bridge building was worth dying for. And about the human colonel with sad eyes who'd carried her to safety without hesitation, whose hands had been gentle despite their strength, who played guitar like he was arguing with God. Tomorrow the real work would begin. The negotiations, the political maneuvering, the careful dance of bringing 2 worlds into alignment. But tonight, as the stars emerged above the Sonoran desert, both of them allowed themselves a moment of quiet. A moment to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the universe had more in store for them than duty and death. And if that possibility terrified them both more than any assassination attempt ever could, well, that was something they'd deal with tomorrow. For now, there was just the desert, and the stars, and the strange comfort of not being quite so alone. The week that followed established a rhythm that felt both inevitable and impossible. Lyra spent her mornings in the filtered atmosphere of her quarters, reviewing treaty documents and conducting virtual meetings with Vexari officials half a galaxy away. Jim spent his mornings teaching flight tactics to cadets who would pilot ships his generation could barely imagine, all while monitoring the security feeds from Lyra's compound with one eye. They met for the first time each day at noon, when Lyra emerged in her environmental suit for the daily briefing. Jim would be waiting, coffee in a thermos he'd learned to prepare the way she liked it, dark and bitter as the Vexari preferred. She never thanked him directly, but he noticed she always finished the cup. The negotiations themselves were a masterclass in diplomatic warfare. Lyra sat across from Earth's Treaty Commission, a panel of politicians and corporate representatives who saw the integration as either salvation or surrender depending on their portfolios. Jim watched from his position by the door, ostensibly security, but really studying the way she worked. She was brilliant. That was the first thing he learned. The way she could pivot from hard economic data to cultural philosophy without missing a beat. The way she could read a room, identify the holdouts, and adjust her approach on the fly. She negotiated like a chess master playing simultaneous games, tracking dozens of moving pieces while appearing perfectly calm. But she was also dying. That was the second thing he learned, and it made watching her work a kind of exquisite torture. By day 3, he could predict when she'd start to fade. 90 minutes into any session in unfiltered atmosphere, the tremor would start in her hands. 2 hours and her luminescence would dim. Push past that, and her breathing became labored, her words coming slower, her brilliant mind clouded by oxygen toxicity. Dr. Martinez had confirmed what Jim suspected. Lyra's condition was worse than anyone knew. She'd been compensating for months, maybe years, pushing her body past safe limits. The Vexari physiology could adapt to short-term oxygen exposure, but chronic exposure caused cumulative damage. Crystal structures in her respiratory system were already beginning to denature, becoming rigid where they should be flexible. 3 months on Earth, Martinez had said quietly, "That's her absolute maximum. After that, even returning to Vexar won't reverse the damage. She'll suffocate slowly over the next year or two, her own body becoming her prison." How long has she been here? Jim had asked, though he already knew the answer. This is week 1. Friday afternoon found them in what had become an unexpected ritual. The Sedona Microclimate Chamber, a research facility 2 hours north of Phoenix, designed for studying extremophile organisms. Dr. Martinez had pulled strings to get them access. The chamber could replicate any planetary atmosphere in the known galaxy, and for 6 hours every Friday, it became a piece of Vexar transported to Arizona. Jim sat outside the chamber in the observation room, watching Lyra through the transparent aluminum barrier. Inside, the atmosphere was 40% carbon dioxide, 15% humidity, temperature hovering at 20 Celsius. For the first time all week, she could breathe without mechanical assistance. She was dancing again, that slow, meditative movement he'd first witnessed on the roof. Her crystalline body caught the chamber's carefully calibrated lighting and transformed it into something that looked like captured aurora. Each movement precise, controlled, a prayer made physical. Jim had brought his guitar, found himself playing softly, trying to match her rhythm. The music couldn't cross the barrier, but she seemed to sense it anyway. Her movements shifted, incorporated the tempo, and for a moment they were creating something together across the impossible divide of biology and physics. When she finished, she came to the barrier, placed one hand against the transparent surface. Jim set down the guitar, matched her gesture from his side. The material between them was only 6 centimeters thick. It might as well have been a galaxy. "Thank you," she said, her voice transmitted through the intercom. "For bringing me here, for understanding." "It's not enough," Jim replied. 6 hours a week while you kill yourself the other 162. Lyra's expression was difficult to read through the refraction of the barrier and the alien geometry of her features. but he thought he saw something like resignation. "It's what I have. I'll take it." "That's not good enough." "Then what would be good enough, Colonel?" She moved closer to the barrier. "Should I abandon the treaty? Return to Vexar and let 12 years of integration work collapse? Watch as extremists on both sides use the failure as proof that cooperation is impossible?" "I don't know." Jim's frustration bled through. "I just know that watching you die by inches for politics feels wrong." "It's not for politics." Her voice was quiet but firm. "It's for my daughter, for Thorin's memory, for every Vexari and human child who'll grow up in whatever universe we leave them. That's worth 6 weeks of discomfort." "This isn't discomfort. This is suicide." Their eyes met through the barrier, held. "Perhaps," Lyra said finally, "but it's my choice to make, and I choose to believe some things are worth dying for." Jim thought about Sarah, about the deployments he'd chosen over her bedside, about the conviction that his work mattered more than his presence. He'd believed it too once. That duty outweighed everything else. Looking at it from the outside, watching someone else make the same calculation, he finally understood what it had cost her, what it had cost them both. The moment broke when Cale entered the observation room, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Colonel Hartwell," his voice carried its usual edge of suspicion. "The ambassador and I need to discuss security protocols, privately." Jim stood, gathering his guitar. "Of course, I'll be outside." "James," Lyra's voice stopped him at the door. He turned. Her hand was still pressed against the barrier. "Tomorrow is Saturday. No formal briefings scheduled. Would you," she hesitated, "would you show me your desert? The parts that matter to you?" The request caught him off guard. That sounds like a security nightmare. "Cale will accompany us, of course, but I'd like to see Earth through local eyes, not the sanitized diplomatic tour, the real thing." Jim looked at Cale, who was radiating disapproval, then back at Lyra. "I know a place. Quiet, beautiful, off the tourist routes. We'd need to leave early before the heat builds." "I'll be ready at 0600. The Superstition Mountains rose from the desert floor like the spine of some sleeping god, all sharp edges and ancient stone. Jim drove the modified all-terrain vehicle with Cale in the passenger seat, both of them watching different threat vectors. Lyra sat in the back, her environmental suit polarized against the morning sun, her excitement palpable despite the barriers between them. Jim had chosen the route carefully. Backroads that saw little traffic, terrain that discouraged casual hikers. They parked at a trailhead that led to one of his favorite spots, a canyon overlook that Sarah had loved. The hike was slow going. Lyra's suit wasn't designed for serious climbing, and the Arizona terrain was unforgiving. But she insisted on continuing, even when Cale suggested they turn back. "I didn't come to Earth to see it through windows," she said, her breathing labored but determined. "I came to understand it." They reached the overlook as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The canyon spread below them, layers of geological time painted in ochre and rust and deep purple shadow. In the distance, a hawk rode thermals, impossibly graceful. Lyra stood at the edge, silent for a long moment. Then she began to glow, that prismatic light show Jim had come to recognize as Vexari emotion. But this was different, softer, like wonder given form. "It's alive," she said quietly. "The whole planet. I've read the data, seen the satellite imagery, but this, being here, feeling the heat, seeing the light, it's like Vexar but completely opposite. Where my world is crystalline and still, yours is organic and chaotic." Jim moved beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. That chaos can kill you if you're not careful. Heat stroke, dehydration, flash floods, rattlesnakes. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Neither does space, but we explore it anyway. Her eyes found his through the face shield. Why did you become a pilot, James? The question surprised him. No one had asked him that in years. My father, he was Air Force, flew rescue missions in Vietnam, came home with stories about the freedom of it, the silence at altitude. The way problems on the ground seemed small when you were 30,000 feet up. He paused, memory pulling him back. He died when I was 17. Heart attack. I joined up 6 months later. Figured if I couldn't talk to him anymore, maybe I could understand him by doing what he did. Did it work? Jim thought about all those years in the cockpit. The missions, the deployments, the choices that had seemed so clear from altitude. For a while, until I realized that understanding and connecting are different things. I understood why he made the choices he did, but I never really knew him. And by the time I figured that out, I'd made the same mistakes with Sarah, with my son. Lyra turned to face him fully. Your son is Marcus, yes, the one who called you when your wife was dying. Jim felt the old wound open. How did you know about that? I read your file, not the official one, the real one. She gestured back toward the vehicle where Cale waited. Cale is very thorough when it comes to people in my life. I know about the crash that ended your flying career, about Sarah's cancer, about the Centauri negotiations you couldn't abandon, about the call from your son that you took while presenting trade data to beings who communicated through skin patterns. Jim's jaw tightened. Then you know I'm the last person who should be lecturing anyone about sacrifice and duty. No, her hand found his arm, the environmental suit's material warm from absorbed sunlight. I know you're the only person who understands exactly what I'm doing and why it terrifies you. They stood in the growing heat, the desert spreading below them like a promise and a warning. Cale was watching from the vehicle, his posture suggesting he was giving them privacy while remaining ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. Tell me about Thorin, Jim said. What was he like? Lyra's glow shifted, became tinged with blue that Jim had learned meant sadness. Stubborn, brilliant, impossibly idealistic. He believed the galaxy could be better than it was, and he was willing to die proving it. She moved to a flat rock, settled onto it with that alien grace. We met during the resource conflicts. I was a junior diplomat, he was a military liaison. Vexari and Chronite forces were on the same side for once, fighting against the Dravixian expansion. He saved my life during a surprise attack, carried me 3 kilometers through toxic atmosphere while his own suit was failing. Romantic beginning. Actually, I was furious with him. I told him to leave me to save himself. He ignored me completely. Very much set the tone for our marriage. Her tone carried humor, but underneath it was grief that time hadn't diminished. We had 22 years together, raised Zara, built a home on Vexar's Crystal Coast, and argued about everything from politics to the proper way to arrange our mineral garden. What did you argue about most? His inability to recognize his own limitations. Her voice went quiet. He always thought he could save one more person, complete one more mission, make one more difference. Until the mission where he couldn't. Jim sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space. How did it happen? Border conflict, year 37 of the integration. A human settlement on Kepler 442b came under attack by isolationist forces. Vexari were supposed to observe, not engage. But Thorin saw civilians dying and couldn't stand by. He led a squad into the firefight, held the line long enough for evacuation. Took a plasma burst meant for a human child. Jim felt something twist in his chest. And you've spent the last 10 years building bridges to the species he died protecting. What else was I supposed to do? Lyra's glow intensified. Hate you all, blame humanity for his choice. That would make his sacrifice meaningless. So I chose to honor it instead, to prove he was right, that we're better together than apart. Even if it kills you. She turned to look at him, those sapphire eyes holding depths he was only beginning to understand. James, we're both dying. You've just chosen a slower method. At least I'll die building something instead of haunting the pieces of what I've lost. The words hit like a physical blow, because she was right. He'd been going through the motions for 6 years, teaching, surviving, playing guitar to ghosts. Not quite living, but not quite ready to stop. How do you do it? He asked. Move forward when everything in you wants to look back. I don't have an answer that will satisfy you, but for me, it's Zara, knowing that she's watching, that the universe I leave her matters more than the pain of staying in it. Jim thought about his own son, about the distance between them that grew wider every year, about the grandchild he'd only seen in photographs because Marcus couldn't forgive him for not being there when it mattered. I've lost my son, he said quietly, not to death, worse, to disappointment. He looks at me and sees the man who chose duty over family, who has principles but no warmth. I don't know how to bridge that gap. Lyra's hand found his again. This time he could feel the heat through the suit material, like touching summer stone. Then don't bridge it. Build something new. You can't undo the past, James, but you can choose what the future looks like. The sun was climbing now, the desert heat building toward dangerous. Cale approached, his expression suggesting they needed to move. Ambassador, we should return. The temperature is becoming unsafe. Lyra stood, but her eyes remained on Jim. Thank you for sharing this place with me. I understand better now why you stay, why this desert holds you. Jim gathered his gear, helped her navigate the rocky descent back to the vehicle. As they drove back toward Phoenix, air conditioning fighting the building heat, he found himself thinking about what she'd said, about building something new instead of repairing what was broken. The idea terrified him more than any security threat ever could. Sunday evening found Jim on his balcony again, guitar in hand, working through a melody that wouldn't quite resolve. The notes hung in the desert air, restless and searching. He'd been at it for an hour, chasing something he couldn't name. Beautiful but troubled. Lyra's voice came from the adjoining balcony. He hadn't heard her come out. Story of my life. She moved to the railing that separated their spaces. About 2 feet of desert air and 10,000 years of evolution. Mind if I listen? I'm a captive audience. Jim played, not the sad songs this time, something else. A melody his father had taught him, about roads and choices and the places where you can't go back. His fingers found the notes more surely this time, the melody settling into something almost hopeful. When he finished, Lyra was glowing softly. That gentle luminescence he'd learned meant contentment. Your playing has changed, she observed. Less grief, more question. Maybe I'm done talking to ghosts. Are you? She turned to face him fully. Because from where I stand, you seem very much in conversation with them still. Jim set the guitar aside. Fair point. What about you? You talk to Thorin. Every day. She looked up at the emerging stars. I tell him about the negotiations, about the progress we're making, about the humans I've met who remind me why he made the sacrifice he did. Do I remind you of him? The question surprised them both. Lyra considered it, her glow shifting through thoughtful patterns. No, you're nothing like Thorin. He was all forward motion, all conviction and action. You're more, she searched for words, more considered. Like you've learned that charging ahead doesn't always lead where you want to go. Hard-won wisdom. The best kind. She paused, but you do remind me of someone. Who? Myself. 10 years ago, when I first realized that grief wasn't going to kill me, but living with it might. When I had to choose between dying slowly or finding a reason to keep moving. What reason did you find? Zara needed me. The Vexari people needed me. And somewhere underneath the pain, I needed to prove that Thorin's faith in unity wasn't misplaced. She moved closer to the railing. "What's your reason, James?" "I don't know yet." His honesty surprised him. For 6 years, it's been inertia. Just one more day, one more class, one more sunrise. But lately. He looked at her. This impossible being who'd crashed into his carefully maintained isolation, like a comet through atmosphere. "Lately, I'm starting to think there might be reasons beyond just surviving." Before Lyra could respond, Kale appeared in the doorway behind her, his expression dark. "Ambassador, you need to come inside, now." The tone sent Jim's tactical instincts into overdrive. He was moving before conscious thought, hand on his sidearm, scanning for threats. "What is it?" Kale's eyes found Jim, and in them was something that might have been respect or might have been warning. "Senator Vance just went on the evening news. She's leaked classified medical information about the ambassador's condition. Every major network is running with it." Lyra was already moving inside, Jim following. The main screen showed Senator Patricia Vance, 72 years old and ambitious as a cancer, speaking to a packed press conference. "The Vexari ambassador is dying," Vance announced, her voice calibrated for maximum outrage. "She has been conducting treaty negotiations while suffering from terminal oxygen toxicity. Her own medical staff estimates she has weeks, perhaps a month, before her condition becomes irreversible. And our government has been complicit in hiding this from the American people." The screen split to show talking heads, analysts, protesters gathering outside the academy gates. The narrative was already forming. Vexari deception, Earth government complicity, integration as a suicide pact. Jim watched Lyra's expression as the news coverage continued. Saw the moment she realized what this meant. Not just for the treaty, but for her daughter, for her people, for everything she'd sacrificed to build. "How did they get my medical records?" Her voice was quiet, controlled, but her glow had dimmed to almost nothing. Kale's expression was granite. "I don't know, but I will find out." The screen shifted to show Vexari High Council issuing a statement. "Ambassador Vel'shara is being recalled immediately. Her health crisis cannot be allowed to jeopardize relations between our species." Lyra's hand went to her chest, a gesture that Jim had learned meant distress. "No, the negotiations aren't complete. If I leave now, everything falls apart." "They're not giving you a choice." Kale's voice was gentle but firm. "The shuttle departs in 72 hours. You're ordered to be on it." Jim's mind was already racing through scenarios, contingencies, ways to buy time. But he could see the mathematics of it. Once the medical situation was public, once her own government demanded her return, there was no diplomatic path forward. "Lyra," he said quietly, "you need to go. This isn't worth your life." She turned to him, and the look in her eyes made his chest tight. Don't you dare tell me what my life is worth. I've spent 10 years building toward this moment. 10 years of negotiations and compromises and political battles. I'm not walking away because some opportunistic politician decided to weaponize my health." "You're not walking away. You're being medically evacuated." "It's the same thing." Her glow flared bright, almost painful to look at. "If I leave now, the extremists win. They get to say that integration is impossible, that Vexari and humans can't coexist, that my husband died for nothing." "Thorin died so you could live." The words came out sharper than Jim intended. "He died protecting you, protecting the idea of unity. How do you honor that by killing yourself?" The room went silent. Even Kale seemed shocked by Jim's vehemence. Lyra moved closer to Jim, and for the first time since they'd met, her usual diplomatic control cracked. You don't understand. Her voice broke. This treaty is everything. It's the culmination of a decade of work. If it fails, if I fail, then what was it all for? The sacrifice, the loneliness, the years spent building bridges while my daughter grew up without me. Maybe it was for teaching Zara that her mother's life has value beyond political achievement. Jim's voice softened. Maybe it was for showing her that sometimes the bravest thing isn't dying for a cause. It's living for the people who love you. Lyra's glow flickered, dimmed, and for a moment she looked utterly defeated. Then she straightened, and Jim saw the steel that had carried her through a decade of diplomatic warfare. I need to think. I need to contact Zara, make arrangements. She looked at Kale. Give me an hour. Then we'll start planning the departure. After she'd retreated to her chambers, Jim found himself alone with Kale. The Cronite studied him with those alien eyes, calculating something. You care for her. It wasn't a question. My job is to protect her. That's not what I asked. Jim met his gaze without flinching. What difference does it make? It makes every difference. Kale moved to the window, watching the protesters gathering in the distance. I've protected Lyra for 8 years. Watched her throw herself into work to avoid grief. Seen her sacrifice relationships, health, happiness, all for this dream of unity. And until she's never questioned whether it was worth it. I'm not trying to sabotage her mission. I know that's what terrifies me. Kale turned back to face him. Because if she starts choosing life over duty, if she allows herself to want something beyond the treaty, she becomes vulnerable in ways I can't protect against. You mean she becomes human? I mean she becomes breakable. And breaking her would destroy not just her, but everything she's built. Everything Thorin died for. Jim thought about Sarah. About the way loving her had broken him when she died. About the 6 years he'd spent avoiding exactly the kind of vulnerability Kale was describing. Maybe breaking isn't the worst thing, he said quietly. Maybe it's the only way to rebuild into something that can actually live instead of just survive. Kale was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Perhaps, but right now, she needs to survive the next 72 hours. And that means getting her home before this planet kills her. The next morning brought chaos. News crews outside the Academy gates. Protesters on both sides, some demanding Lyra's immediate departure, others rallying in support of the integration. The Treaty Commission had suspended negotiations pending review of the medical situation. Jim found Lyra in the conference room, surrounded by virtual screens showing various Vexari officials, all speaking over each other in their musical language. She was holding her ground, but he could see the strain. The council wants me to make a statement condemning Earth's medical facilities, Kale translated quietly. Shift blame for her condition to incompetent human doctors. That's insane. She came here already compromised. Politics rarely concerns itself with truth. Jim watched Lyra navigate the virtual minefield. Saw her defend Earth's medical staff, push back against attempts to weaponize her illness, maintain diplomatic courtesy while her own government tried to turn her suffering into propaganda. When the calls finally ended, she slumped in her chair, her glow barely visible. They want me to be a martyr, she said quietly, a symbol of human negligence, instead of what I actually am. Which is? Tired, James, I'm so tired. He moved to her side, knelt so they were eye level. The position was intimate, vulnerable, and he saw surprise flicker across her features. Then rest. Go home, recover, come back when your health is stable. You know I can't do that. 3 months minimum recovery time on Vexar. By then, the treaty window closes. The moderates lose ground. The extremists win. Then let them win this battle. Fight the next one. There won't be a next one. Her glow flared. This is it, James. 12 years of building toward this moment. If I walk away, it all collapses. Integration stalls, probably reverses. Humans and Vexari drift apart. Your children and mine grow up in a galaxy divided by fear instead of united by hope. Jim took her hands, felt the heat through the environmental suit material. Lyra, look at me. Really look at me. I'm a 58-year-old man who spent 6 years playing guitar to a ghost because I couldn't face the fact that I'd chosen duty over love and lost everything that mattered. You're about to make the same choice. And I'm telling you from experience, the regret will kill you slower, but just as surely as the oxygen toxicity. Her eyes held his, sapphire depths reflecting his own face back at him. What would you have me do? Abandon everything I've worked for, everything Thorin died for. I'd have you choose life. Choose Zara. Choose the possibility that maybe there's more to existence than sacrifice and duty. And what about you, James? What do you choose? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Jim realized with absolute clarity that he was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to safety, to the careful isolation he'd maintained for 6 years. The other led somewhere terrifying and unknown. I choose, he started, then stopped as alarms blared throughout the compound. Security breach. Kale's voice cut through the chaos. Multiple hostiles, armed, heading for the ambassador's location. Jim was moving before thought, pulling Lyra from the chair, positioning himself between her and the door. His sidearm appeared in his hand like magic, years of training overriding conscious thought. Kale, get her to the safe room. Now. The Chronite didn't argue, just swept Lyra into his arms despite her protests, and moved toward the reinforced panic room built into every diplomatic quarters. Jim took position in the hallway, weapon-ready, mind cataloging tactical data. 3 hostiles visible, 2 more probable. Mixed species, human and Dravixian. Professional movement, military-grade weapons. This wasn't a protest gone wrong. This was an assassination attempt. The first hostile came around the corner fast. Jim put 2 rounds center mass before the target could acquire. The Dravixian dropped, his 4 arms splaying wide. Academy security was responding, but they were 60 seconds out. Jim had to hold for 60 seconds. The second and third hostiles came together, coordinated fire. Jim felt a round crack past his ear, close enough to hear. He returned fire, dropped back, using the doorframe for cover. Then the fourth hostile came through the ceiling. Jim barely got his weapon up in time. The attacker was human, female, enhanced reflexes obvious in the way she moved. Her blade was already descending, aimed for his throat. He blocked with his forearm, felt the blade bite deep, ignored the pain, and slammed the butt of his weapon into her temple. She dropped, unconscious but alive. The remaining hostiles retreated as Academy security flooded the hallway. Jim sagged against the wall, left arm bleeding, adrenaline making everything sharp and distant at the same time. Dr. Martinez appeared, medical kit in hand, already assessing the damage. You're getting too old for this hero stuff, brother. Apparently not old enough to learn better. The blade had cut deep but missed major arteries. Martinez worked with practiced efficiency, closing the wound, administering antitoxins in case the blade had been poisoned. Lyra emerged from the safe room with Kale, and the look on her face made Jim's chest tight. Not fear, not gratitude, something deeper, more complicated. You're hurt. Occupational hazard. Jim tried for levity, failed. You okay? She moved to him, knelt beside him despite Kale's protective hovering, and placed one hand against his chest. The gesture was intimate, shocking in its tenderness. You could have died. That's generally how assassination attempts work. Don't, her glow was dim, but her voice was fierce. Don't make jokes about this. You stepped between me and death without hesitation. Why? Because, Jim met her eyes. Because some things are worth protecting, even if it costs everything. The words hung in the space between them, meaning more than either wanted to acknowledge. Cale cleared his throat. We need to move the ambassador to a more secure location. This compound is compromised. Agreed, Jim said, trying to stand. Martinez pushed him back down. You're going to medical. That wound needs proper treatment. I'm fine. You're bleeding through the field dressing. You're going to medical or I'm sedating you here. Your choice. Lyra's hand was still on his chest. He could feel her heat through his shirt, the alien warmth of her. Go, she said quietly. Let them take care of you. I'll be safe with Cale. Promise me, Jim heard himself say. Promise me you'll get on that shuttle tomorrow. Go home, live. Her eyes held his. I promised to consider it. It wasn't enough, but it was all he was going to get. The medical bay was quiet, the Academy's night shift skeleton crew. Martinez had cleaned and closed the wound properly, giving Jim a local anesthetic that made his arm feel like it belonged to someone else. 15 stitches, Martinez announced. Could have been worse. That blade missed your brachial artery by maybe a centimeter. Lucky me. You know what I think. Martinez settled into the chair beside the examination table. I think your luck is changing, and it's scaring the hell out of you. Jim didn't bother denying it. What gave me away? The fact that you just took a knife for an alien diplomat you met a week ago. The fact that you're fighting to save her when saving her means losing her. Martinez's expression was serious. Jim, I've known you for 30 years. I watched you fall in love with Sarah, watched you build a life with her, watched you destroy yourself with guilt when she died. And I'm watching you do it again. It's not the same. Isn't it? You're falling for someone who's leaving. Someone who might not survive even if she goes home. You're setting yourself up for another round of grief and guilt, and part of you thinks that's what you deserve. Jim stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations to avoid meeting his friend's eyes. What if I am? What if loving people who leave is just what I do? Then maybe it's time to learn a new pattern. Martinez leaned forward. Here's the truth, brother. You can't save Lyra. You can't make her choose life over duty. You can't protect her from the consequences of her own convictions. All you can do is be honest about what you feel and let her make her own choice. And if she chooses to leave, then you let her go with grace instead of regret. You tell her what she meant to you. You don't make the same mistake you made with Sarah. Jim's throat was tight. I don't know if I can do that. Yes, you can. Because the alternative is spending another 6 years playing guitar to ghosts. And frankly, Jim, I don't think you'd survive it this time. The door opened. Cale stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The ambassador wishes to see you, if you're able. Jim sat up, ignoring the protest from his stitched arm. Where is she? Her quarters. She's asked to speak with you privately. Martinez raised an eyebrow. That's either very good or very bad. I can't tell which. Lyra's quarters were dim, the lighting adjusted to match Vexari preference. She stood by the window, looking out at the desert night, her glow the only illumination in the room. How's your arm? She asked without turning. I'll live. Jim moved to stand beside her, maintaining careful distance. How are you? Conflicted, angry, grateful, terrified. She turned to face him, take your pick. All of the above sounds right. They stood in the gentle darkness, two people from different worlds, connected by something neither quite wanted to name. I spoke with Zara, Lyra said quietly. Told her about the attack, about the recall order, about everything. Do you know what she said? What? She said that if I came home and died anyway, she'd never forgive me. But if I stayed here and died for something that mattered, at least she'd understand. Jim felt something cold in his chest. Lyra, that's not. I know it's the grief talking, the idealism. She's young enough to still believe that dying for a cause is noble. She hasn't learned yet that surviving for the people you love takes more courage. Then teach her. Go home. Show her that choosing life isn't cowardice. Lyra's hand found his uninjured arm. What if I told you I found something here worth staying for? Something beyond the treaty. Don't. Jim's voice was rough. Don't make this about me. Don't use what's between us as an excuse to kill yourself. What is between us, James? The question forced him to look at her, really look at her. At the alien beauty of her crystalline form, the sapphire eyes that held depths of intelligence and pain. At the being who'd somehow slipped past his defenses in a week when he'd spent 6 years building walls. I don't know, but I know I can't watch you die for it. Then look away. Her glow intensified. Because I've made my choice. I'm staying. Not for you, not even for the treaty. I'm staying because leaving would mean they won. The extremists, the fearmongers, everyone who believes unity is impossible. I won't give them that satisfaction. Even if it kills you. Especially if it kills you, because then I become a martyr for what I believed in. She moved closer, and he could feel the heat radiating from her. But James, I need you to understand something. If I stay, if I see this through, I need you to not carry guilt for it. This is my choice, not yours to save me from. How am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to stand by and watch you die by inches? The same way I watched Thorin walk into battles I couldn't follow him into. With faith, with respect for his agency, with the knowledge that some people's purpose is bigger than their survival. Her hand moved to his face, the environmental suit's material warm against his skin. And maybe, she said so quietly he almost didn't hear, with the understanding that connection isn't measured in years. That a week of truly seeing someone can matter more than decades of going through motions. Jim's hand covered hers, holding it against his cheek. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that for 10 years I've been a monument to grief. And you, for 6 years, have been the same. We're both experts at mourning. Maybe it's time we tried something else. Like what? Like being alive while we still can. Like admitting that this thing between us, whatever it is, deserves acknowledgement even if it's impossible. Lyra, his voice broke on her name. Don't say my name like that, like I'm already gone. I'm here, right now, and I'm asking you to be here with me. For how long? Weeks, days? For however long we have. Isn't that all anyone gets? Sarah taught you that. Thorin taught me. The universe doesn't promise us decades. Sometimes it only gives us moments. The question is whether we're brave enough to take them. Jim pulled her closer, feeling the impossible heat of her through the suit, the alien warmth that should have warned him away but instead drew him in. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone who's dying. Neither do I, but maybe we figure it out together. They stood in the darkness, alien and human, both broken, both terrified, both choosing to risk the pain of connection over the safety of isolation. The kiss, when it came, was complicated by the environmental suit. Lyra had to adjust the face shield, create a seal that would let them touch without her being exposed to too much oxygen. The result was awkward, fumbling, and more meaningful than anything Jim had felt in years. Her lips were hot against his, her breath strange and sweet. The kiss lasted only seconds before the oxygen levels forced her to pull back. But in those seconds, Jim felt something he thought had died with Sarah. Hope. They separated, both breathing hard for different reasons. Lyra's glow was brilliant now, filling the room with prismatic light. That was, she started. Complicated, Jim finished. Worth it, though. Definitely worth it. They sat together on the geometric furniture, hands clasped, watching the desert night through the window. In 72 hours, Lyra was supposed to board a shuttle home. In 72 hours, this fragile thing between them would face the reality of biology and politics and the vast distances between worlds. But for now, they had this moment. And as Lyra had said, sometimes moments were all the universe gave you. The question was whether they were brave enough to take them all. The dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Jim stood on the roof, guitar silent beside him, watching the sun paint the Arizona sky in shades that reminded him why he'd stayed in this desert for 6 years. Below, the academy compound was stirring to life, but up here the world felt suspended, caught between what was and what might be. Lyra emerged from the stairwell, moving slower than usual, her glow dimmed to barely visible. She'd spent the night in full oxygen atmosphere, attending virtual meetings with Vexari officials who were demanding her immediate return. The strain showed in every movement. You should be resting, Jim said without turning. So should you. Your arm must be killing you. He flexed his injured arm, feeling the pull of stitches under the bandage. Martinez had done good work, but the wound was deep. It would scar, adding another mark to the topography of a life lived in service. Lyra settled beside him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her crystalline form, even through her environmental suit. The desert air was cool this early, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. 72 hours, she said quietly. That's what they're giving me. 3 days to either board the shuttle home or face formal censure from the Vexari High Council. What does censure mean? Stripped of rank, loss of diplomatic credentials, potential exile. Her voice was matter of fact. Essentially, I become a non-person in Vexari society. Zara's career would be damaged by association. My family's standing would collapse. So they're not giving you a choice. They're giving you an ultimatum. There's always a choice, James. The consequences just become steeper. Jim took her hand, felt the warmth through the suit material. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish what I started. The treaty negotiations resume tomorrow. I have 60 hours to complete 12 years of work. She turned to look at him, and then I'm going to make a choice that will change everything. The weight in her voice made his chest tight. What choice? Dr. Martinez found me last night, after you went to medical. He told me about a research project, experimental, dangerous, but potentially, she paused, potentially it could allow me to stay. Jim's tactical mind immediately went on alert. What kind of research? Symbiotic bacteria from Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. Martinez has been working with xenobiologists on species adaptation protocols. Apparently, there's a strain that can modify respiratory systems at the cellular level. In theory, it could allow a Vexari to process oxygen the way you do. In theory. The success rate is 40%. The process takes 72 hours. If it works, I could live on Earth indefinitely. If it doesn't, she met his eyes. If it doesn't, I die on the operating table. No, the word came out harder than Jim intended. Absolutely not. It's not your decision to make. Like hell it isn't. I'm not watching you gamble your life on a coin flip when you have a guaranteed path to survival. Go home, recover, come back when it's safe. And abandon the treaty. Watch everything collapse while I'm half a galaxy away. Better than watching you die here. They stared at each other, the morning sun painting them both in shades of copper and gold. Jim could see the determination in her eyes, the same stubborn conviction that had gotten her this far. "There's more," Lyra said quietly. "The procedure has side effects. Even if successful, even if I survive, I'll lose my bioluminescence, the glow that defines Vexari identity. I'll be able to breathe oxygen, but I'll never be able to return to Vexar. The atmospheric shift would kill me." "So you'd be stranded here, cut off from your people, your home, everything you know." "Yes." "For what? A treaty that might fail anyway. A planet that's tried to kill you since you arrived." Lyra's hand tightened on his, for the chance to build something new, for the possibility that maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's the people who make you want to keep living. The implications of that statement hung between them, too enormous to fully process. "You barely know me," Jim said, his voice rough. "A week. That's all we've had. You can't throw away your entire life for something that might not last." "Can't I?" She moved closer. "James, I spent 10 years being a monument to my husband's memory, a decade of grief and duty and careful isolation. And then I met you, a stubborn human who plays sad guitar and takes knives for people he barely knows, who understands loss so deeply he's been drowning in it for 6 years. That's not a recommendation for a relationship." "No, but it's a foundation for honesty. We both know what it's like to lose everything, which means we both know exactly what we're risking if we choose this." "If you choose this, you mean? I'm not the one gambling my life." "Aren't you?" Her sapphire eyes held his. "You've been dead inside since Sarah passed. Going through motions, teaching classes, surviving but not living. If you let me take this risk, if you choose to be present for whatever comes next, that's just as much a gamble. Because you might lose me too. And that kind of pain, a second time, it could destroy what's left of you." Jim thought about the 6 years since Sarah's death. The empty house, the one-sided conversations with a ghost, the slow erosion of purpose. Lyra was right. He'd been surviving, not living, playing it safe because safe meant not hurting again. "What if I can't do it?" he asked quietly. "What if I can't watch you take that risk?" "Then I do it anyway. Because, James, I've spent my whole life making decisions based on duty and protocol and what other people need from me. Just once, I want to make a choice based on what I want. And what I want is a chance at something real, even if it's brief, even if it's doomed." The sun was fully up now, the desert coming alive with heat and light. Jim looked at this impossible being beside him, this alien diplomat who'd somehow reached past his defenses and made him care again. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow night, after the final treaty session. Martinez needs 24 hours to prepare the bacterial cultures. The procedure takes 72 hours from start to finish." She paused. "The shuttle leaves in 72 hours, so either I'm on it, going home, or I'm on an operating table, betting everything on 40% odds." "And if I asked you not to?" "I'd tell you that I love you too much to let your fear make my choices for me." The words hit like a physical blow. "I love you," said so simply, so directly, as if they hadn't known each other barely 10 days. As if love was something that could be measured in intensity rather than duration. "Lyra," Jim's voice cracked on her name. "Don't say it back. Not yet. Not until you've had time to think about what it means." She stood, swaying slightly from the oxygen exposure. "I have a treaty to finish. You have a decision to make. We'll talk tonight." She left him on the roof, alone with the sun and his guitar, and the terrifying knowledge that he was standing at a crossroads that would define whatever was left of his life. The treaty negotiations resumed at 1000 hours in conference room. Jim took his position by the door, bodyguard stance, watching Lyra work her diplomatic magic, while his mind churned through impossible scenarios. The room was tense. Senator Vance had done her damage. Earth's negotiating team was fractured, some pushing for immediate conclusion to the talks, others wanting to suspend until Lyra's health situation was resolved. The Vexari virtual delegation was equally divided, half supporting Lyra's mission, half demanding her immediate recall. Lyra sat at the center of it all, a fulcrum point between worlds, and orchestrated agreement through sheer force of will and brilliant political instinct. Jim watched her argue down a hardliner who wanted to insert cultural purity clauses into the trade agreements. Watched her find compromise between Earth corporations demanding technology access and Vexari councils protecting strategic advantages. Watched her work the room like a chess grandmaster, seeing moves ahead that others couldn't imagine. But he also watched her fade. 2 hours in and the tremor started in her hands. 3 hours and her luminescence dimmed dangerously. 4 hours and she was struggling to focus, oxygen toxicity clouding her brilliant mind. Ambassador, one of the Earth negotiators, said, concern evident. Perhaps we should take a recess. You look unwell. I'm fine. Continue. Jim caught Dr. Martinez's eye across the room. His friend's expression was grim. She was pushing too hard, burning through reserves she didn't have. The session broke for lunch. Lyra made it to the private conference room before her legs gave out. Jim caught her, lowered her carefully into a chair while Kale sealed the room and activated emergency atmospheric controls. The air shifted, became enriched with carbon dioxide. Lyra gasped, drawing in deep breaths of the atmosphere her body was designed for. You're killing yourself, Jim said quietly. I'm finishing my work. Her voice was weak but determined. 2 more sessions, maybe 3. Then the framework will be complete. Either Earth signs or they don't, but I'll have done everything I could. And then I make my choice. Kale appeared with a medical kit, began running scans. His expression darkened as he reviewed the results. Ambassador, your silicate structures are showing advanced deterioration. If you continue at this pace, you won't last another 48 hours. Even returning to Vexar might not save you at this point. Lyra closed her eyes. Then I'd better work fast. Over the next 36 hours, Jim watched Lyra accomplish something that should have been impossible. She worked through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the slow suffocation of Earth's atmosphere. She negotiated, compromised, built consensus, and created a treaty framework that satisfied moderates on both sides while giving extremists minimal ammunition. By the second evening, the core documents were complete. Pending final review and ratification, the Earth-Vexari Integration Treaty would be renewed for another 5 years, with provisions for cultural exchange, technology sharing, and dispute resolution that both sides could live with. The Treaty Commission adjourned with cautious optimism. Lyra remained in her chair, too exhausted to move. You did it, Jim said quietly, kneeling beside her. 12 years of work. It's done. Not quite. She managed a weak smile, still needs signatures, ratification by both governments, implementation protocols, but yes, the hard part is done. Now comes the harder part. Now comes the choice. They sat in the dimming conference room, the desert sunset painting the windows in impossible colors. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and the faint ozone tang of electronic equipment. I talked to Martinez, he said, about the procedure, the risks. And he says you're insane. That 40% odds aren't good enough. That there are too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong. But he also says he's seen the preliminary data. The bacterial cultures are responding well to the Vexari tissue samples. The modification process is elegant, theoretically sound. If it works, if you survive, you could have years, maybe decades. Here, on Earth. Yes. Jim took her hands, felt the heat that had become familiar. I need you to understand something. If you do this, if you take this risk, I'm all in. No holding back, no protecting myself from potential loss. I'll be there through the procedure, through the recovery, through whatever comes after. But Lyra, I need you to be sure. Because I can't, he stopped, voice breaking. I can't watch you die and then spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have stopped you. You can't stop me, but you can support me. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched through her environmental suit. James, I'm 52 years old. I've lived a full life. Raised a daughter, served my people, built something that matters. If I die tomorrow on that operating table, I'll die knowing I made a choice for myself. Not for duty, not for politics, for love. The word still had the power to stop his breath. I love you too, he said. The words felt rusty, unused since Sarah, but true. I don't know how it happened so fast. I don't know if it makes sense. But I do. I love you. Then love me enough to let me risk everything. Because that's what love is. Not protecting people from their own choices, but standing with them through the consequences. The shuttle was scheduled to depart in 18 hours. The procedure was scheduled to begin in 12. Jim had 12 hours to either support Lyra's choice or spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. He chose to stand with her. Dr. Martinez's lab was in the medical research wing, a space that smelled of antiseptic and possibility, the air cool and sterile. Lyra lay on the examination table, her environmental suit removed for the first time since arriving on Earth, her crystalline body exposed to oxygen-rich atmosphere that was slowly poisoning her. Jim stood beside her, holding her hand, feeling the heat that was becoming feverish as her body struggled to process the toxic air. The bacterial introduction will take 6 hours, Martinez explained, reviewing displays that showed more data than Jim could process. During that time, the cultures will begin modifying your respiratory system at the cellular level. You'll be conscious but sedated. Minimal pain, but you'll feel the changes happening. And if it doesn't work, Lyra's voice was calm, accepting. If it doesn't work, your respiratory system will collapse. You'll have maybe 20 minutes before brain death. Martinez's expression was grim. I can keep you comfortable, but I can't reverse the process once it starts. Understood. Lyra, Jim started. She squeezed his hand. I'm sure, James. I've never been more sure of anything. Martinez prepared the injection, a cocktail of bacterial cultures and supporting compounds that glowed faintly blue under the lab lights. This is it. Last chance to change your mind. Lyra looked at Jim, those sapphire eyes holding everything they hadn't had time to say. See you on the other side, she said. The injection was subcutaneous, directly into the respiratory matrix that ran through her crystalline structure. Jim watched the blue liquid disappear into her body, watched her eyes widen as the bacteria began their work. I can feel it, she whispered, like ice water spreading through my veins. That's normal. Martinez monitored the readouts. The bacteria are mapping your respiratory system, identifying the structures that need modification. Over the next hour, Jim watched Lyra's body begin to change. Subtle at first. The blue glow that defined her dimming slightly, becoming less vibrant. Then more obvious shifts. The crystalline structures that made up her form becoming less transparent, more opaque. It hurts, she gasped, her hand tightening on Jim's. I know. Martinez adjusted the sedation levels. Try to breathe through it. The bacteria are rebuilding your alveolar equivalents. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Worse was an understatement. Jim sat beside Lyra through 6 hours of transformation that looked like torture. Her body convulsed as alien bacteria rewrote her biology. Her luminescence flickered and died, leaving her a dull gray that looked wrong, broken. She screamed twice, sounds that would haunt Jim's dreams. But she survived the initial phase. Martinez ran new scans, his expression cautiously optimistic. The integration is taking. Her respiratory system is adapting, but we're not out of the woods yet. The next 66 hours are critical. Her body could still reject the modification. What are her odds now? Better than 40%, maybe 65, 70. Martinez looked at Lyra, unconscious now from the sedation. She's strong, stronger than any Vexari I've studied. But James, even if this works, she's not going to be the same. The bioluminescence is gone permanently. Her body temperature will drop to human normal. She'll be, he searched for words, something new. Not quite Vexari, not quite human, something in between. Will she be happy? That, brother, is up to you two to figure out. The hours that followed were the longest of Jim's life. He sat beside Lyra's bed in the medical bay, holding her hand, watching monitors that tracked vital signs he didn't fully understand. Martinez came and went, adjusting medications, running tests, offering updates that ranged from encouraging to terrifying. Cale appeared on the second day, his massive frame filling the doorway. How is she? Stable, maybe getting better. Jim looked up at the chronite. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. Cale moved into the room, his eyes on Lyra. I've protected her for 8 years, watched her sacrifice everything for duty. For the first time, she's choosing something for herself. I owe it to her to witness that choice. Even if it kills her. Especially if it kills her, because at least she'll die having lived first. They sat together in silence, human and chronite, united by love for the same impossible woman. On the third day, Lyra opened her eyes. Jim, who'd been dozing in the chair beside her bed, jerked awake at the sound of her voice. She was looking at him with those sapphire eyes, and even though her glow was gone, even though her crystalline form had become opaque and strange, she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Hey, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. Did it work? Her voice was different, weaker, more fragile than the musical tones he'd grown used to. Martinez appeared, scans already running. Let's find out. Breathe deep for me, Ambassador. No suit, no filters, just earth air. Lyra drew in a breath, then another. Her eyes widened. I can breathe. No pain, no struggle. Just, she laughed, a sound that was pure joy, just breathing. Martinez grinned. Welcome to Earth, Lyra Vel'shara, permanent resident. The next week was recovery and adjustment. Lyra had to relearn basic movements as her body adapted to its new normal. Without the bioluminescence that had helped regulate her temperature, she experienced cold for the first time. Jim brought her blankets, sweaters, taught her about human comfort in a way that felt intimate and domestic. Zara arrived on day 5, her ship making an unauthorized detour from patrol routes. She materialized in the medical bay doorway, still in her fleet uniform, and stared at her mother with an expression that cycled through shock, anger, and finally, understanding. Mom, Zara's voice cracked. What did you do? I chose, Lyra said simply. For once in my life, I chose what I wanted instead of what duty demanded. Mother and daughter looked at each other across a gulf of biology and choice. Then Zara crossed the room and carefully, so carefully, embraced her mother. You're warm, Zara whispered. You were always so hot to touch. Now yours, she pulled back, looking at Lyra with wonder. You're like them, like humans. Is that okay? Zara glanced at Jim, who'd stepped back to give them privacy, then back at her mother. Dad died believing in unity between species, in the possibility of connection across biological boundaries. She gestured at Lyra's transformed body, you've become proof that he was right. That we can bridge any gap if we're willing to transform. Even at terrible cost. Maybe especially at terrible cost. Zara's expression was fierce. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to risk everything for what matters. I'm proud of you, Mom. Jim watched the reunion, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. But then Lyra's hand found his, pulled him into the embrace, and suddenly he was part of it. Part of this strange new family being born from impossible choices. Later, after Zara had left to deal with the disciplinary hearing awaiting her for the unauthorized detour, Lyra and Jim sat together on the medical bay balcony. She was wearing one of his sweaters, 3 sizes too big, bundled against the evening chill that her transformed body now felt. I got word from the Vexari High Council, she said quietly. They've formally censured me, stripped my diplomatic credentials, removed my family name from the registry. As far as Vexar is concerned, I no longer exist. Jim pulled her closer. I'm sorry. Don't be. She looked up at the emerging stars. I traded one identity for another. The old Lyra Vel'shara died on that operating table. This new person, whoever she is, gets to decide what matters now. And what matters? You, she turned to face him. This planet. The possibility of building something new instead of maintaining something old. I spent 10 years being Thorin's widow. Now I get to be, she paused, what do I get to be, James? Whatever you want. Jim kissed her forehead, marveling at the temperature that was now merely warm instead of scorching. You want to be an ambassador, you can consult on integration policy. You want to teach xenopolitical theory, the Academy would be lucky to have you. You want to run a coffee shop in Sedona and never look at a treaty document again, I'll learn to make espresso. What if I want to just be someone who loves you and sees where that goes? Then that's what you get to be. They sat together as the desert night deepened, watching stars that connected worlds they'd both left behind. The treaty ratification ceremony took place 2 weeks later. Earth's Senate had approved the framework by a narrow margin, Vexari Council following suit after heated debate. It wasn't perfect, wasn't everything Lyra had hoped for, but it was enough. 5 more years of integration, of building bridges, of proving that unity was possible. Lyra attended as a private citizen, no longer representing Vexar, but present as the architect of the agreement. She wore human clothes now, a simple dress that Jim had helped her pick out, her transformed body no longer generating the heat that had required special materials. Senator Vance was there, looking sour as the treaty she'd tried to sabotage was signed into law. Jim caught her eye across the room, saw the calculation there. After the ceremony, he watched as federal agents quietly escorted her out a side entrance. Martinez had mentioned earlier that morning that the leak of classified medical records was being investigated as a federal crime. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. After the ceremony, General Stone pulled Jim aside. I'm putting you in for early retirement, Colonel. You've earned it. Sir. Don't play dumb, Hartwell. You fell in love with your protectee, broke about 17 regulations in the process. Technically, I should court-martial you. Stone's expression softened. But you also saved her life, protected the treaty, and proved that sometimes breaking rules is the right call. So retire with honors. Spend your pension on something that makes you happy for once. Jim looked across the room at Lyra, who was talking with Dr. Martinez and Kale. She laughed at something Martinez said, and the sound was pure and human and perfect. I think I know exactly what to spend it on, sir. The house in Sedona was small, perched on the edge of the red rock formations that gave the area its magic. Jim and Lyra had found it together, a compromise between his need for quiet and her desire to be near the microclimate chamber she still visited monthly for health checkups. They settled into a rhythm that felt both alien and natural. Mornings on the porch with coffee, the smell of it mixing with desert sage. Lyra still learning to appreciate the bitter taste. Afternoons working on their respective projects, Jim writing a memoir about integration, Lyra consulting remotely on diplomatic issues. Evenings making dinner together, Lyra learning human cuisine while teaching Jim Vexari meditation practices that didn't require bioluminescence. 6 months after the procedure, Lyra woke Jim in the middle of the night, her hand on his shoulder. "James, something's wrong." His military training kicked in immediately. He was up, alert, scanning for threats before his conscious mind fully engaged. "What is it?" "I can feel them." Her hand went to her chest, the bacterial colonies. There she struggled for words. They're adapting, changing. Jim grabbed his phone, dialed Martinez. The doctor answered on the second ring, already alert. "Get her to the hospital, now." The drive to the medical facility was the longest 20 minutes of Jim's life. Lyra sat beside him, her breathing labored, her skin taking on a strange translucence that reminded him of her original crystalline form. Martinez met them at the door, mobile scanning equipment already in hand. The readings made him swear. The bacteria aren't just maintaining the respiratory modification. They're evolving, adapting to her specific biology. He pulled up a holographic display. "This is incredible. This is," he paused, "this is something new." "Is she dying?" Jim's voice was harsh. "No," Martinez's expression was wonder mixed with caution. "She's changing again. The bacterial colonies have formed a symbiotic relationship with her remaining Vexari biology. They're creating something we've never seen before. A true hybrid physiology." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not fully human," Lyra said, her voice strengthening. "And I'm not fully Vexari anymore. I'm something in between." Over the next 72 hours, they watched the transformation complete itself. Lyra's skin took on a subtle iridescence, not the full bioluminescence of her original form, but a gentle shimmer like mother of pearl. Her body temperature stabilized somewhere between Vexari hot and human normal. She could breathe Earth's atmosphere with ease, but could also tolerate high CO2 environments that would incapacitate a human. "You're a bridge," Martinez said, reviewing the final scans. "Literally. A living connection between two biologies. The implications for future integration are," he shook his head, "I don't even know where to start." "But I'm stable," Lyra asked. "This is permanent." "As far as I can tell, yes. You're not Vexari, you're not human. You're the first of something entirely new." Jim took her hand, marveling at the warmth that was now perfectly comfortable against his skin. "How do you feel about that?" Lyra considered the question, then smiled, and in that smile was everything they'd survived and everything they were building. "I feel free. For the first time in my life, I don't have to be what anyone expects. I get to just be myself." They returned to Sedona, to the little house with the red rock view. News of Lyra's continued transformation had spread, bringing scientists and diplomats and curious onlookers. But they'd learned to maintain boundaries, to protect the quiet life they were building. 3 months later, Marcus called. Jim saw his son's name on the screen and felt his chest tighten with the familiar mixture of hope and dread. "Dad," Marcus's voice carried something new. Warmth, maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. "Sarah and I have been talking. About you. About Mom. About," he paused, "about how we all handle grief differently." Jim's throat was tight. "I'm listening." "We want to visit. Bring Emma. Let her meet her grandfather. The real one, not just the voice on video calls." Marcus took a breath. "I'm not saying everything's fixed, but I'm saying I'm willing to try if you are." "I'm willing." Jim's voice cracked. "More than willing. When?" "Next month. We could stay a few days." Sarah wants to see the desert. Emma's never been outside the city. After the call ended, Jim sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sunset paint the rocks in impossible colors. Lyra found him there, settled beside him with 2 cups of coffee. Good news. The best. My son wants to try again. She took his hand. You're getting your second chance after all. We both are. When Marcus arrived 4 weeks later, Jim was waiting on the porch. His son emerged from the rental car, looking older than Jim remembered, lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and responsibility. Behind him came Sarah, Marcus's wife, carrying 2-year-old Emma. The little girl had Sarah's eyes. His Sarah, the grandmother she'd never meet. Marcus stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, and for a moment, they just looked at each other across the distance of 6 years and 1,000 unspoken regrets. Then Marcus said, I'm still angry. About the deployment. About you not being there. I don't know if that anger ever fully goes away. I know. Jim descended the steps slowly. I don't expect it to. I don't deserve for it to. But Marcus continued, watching you with Lyra these past months, seeing the updates, the photos. You're different. Present in a way you never were before. And I think, he swallowed hard, I think Mom would be glad you found that again. Jim felt tears prick his eyes. She would have liked Lyra. Yeah, Marcus managed a small smile. She would have. Emma squirmed in Sarah's arms, reaching toward Jim with the fearless curiosity of toddlers. Grandpa. That's right, sweetheart. Marcus set her down gently. That's your grandpa. The little girl toddled forward, and Jim knelt to her level. She studied him with serious eyes, then broke into a gap-toothed grin and threw her arms around his neck. Jim held his granddaughter and felt something break open in his chest. Not the sharp pain of old grief, but something gentler. The slow thaw of a heart that had been frozen for too long. Lyra appeared in the doorway, and Jim watched Marcus's expression shift from wary to curious to accepting. You must be Lyra, Marcus said. And you must be the son who's brave enough to give his father another chance. She smiled. Thank you for that. Over the next 3 days, they built something fragile and new. Marcus and Jim took long walks in the desert, talking about Sarah, about the past, about the possibility of a future that included both of them. Sarah and Lyra bonded over being the sane ones who'd married stubborn military men. Emma decided that Grandpa Jim's guitar was the best toy ever invented and demanded nightly concerts. On the last evening, after Emma was asleep, the 4 of them sat on the porch watching stars emerge. I can't promise it'll be easy, Marcus said quietly. There's still a lot of hurt. I know, Jim didn't look away from the stars, but I'm here for as long as it takes. That's all I'm asking. After Marcus's family left, the house felt simultaneously emptier and fuller. Empty of their physical presence, but full of the possibility they'd left behind. A year after they'd met, Jim woke to find Lyra on their porch, watching the sunrise with that same meditative stillness he'd first witnessed on the academy roof. He brought 2 cups of coffee, settled beside her, and they watched the desert come alive together. Do you regret it, he asked, giving up everything you were for this? She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. I regret the pain I caused Zara. I regret that I'll never see the crystal forests of Vexari again. I regret that Thorin didn't live to see what we built. She turned to look at him. But I don't regret choosing you, choosing us, choosing to live instead of just survive. Even knowing what it cost. Especially knowing what it cost, because that's what makes it real. Easy choices don't transform us, hard ones do. Jim pulled her close, feeling the subtle warmth of her hybrid biology, the shimmer of her skin catching the morning light. I love you. The words came easier now after months of practice. I love you for your courage, for your stubbornness, for choosing to risk everything when you could have played it safe. I love you for seeing me. Her hand found his. Not the diplomat, not the widow, not the alien curiosity, just me, the person underneath all the roles and expectations. In the house behind them, Jim's guitar waited. He'd play later, something new he'd been working on. Not a morning song, not a conversation with ghosts. Something about beginnings instead of endings. About the courage it takes to try again when everything in you says to give up. Lyra would dance to it, that hybrid movement that combined Vexari grace with human rhythm. And in that moment, in that simple domestic magic, they'd prove again that some transformations were worth any price. The desert stretched before them, vast and beautiful and utterly indifferent to the small dramas of the creatures who crossed it. But Jim and Lyra had learned that indifference wasn't cruelty. It was freedom. The universe didn't care what they were or where they came from or how impossible their love seemed to outside observers. It only cared that they were here, now, alive and present, and choosing each other despite every reason not to. In a universe measured in light years and cosmic time, 1 year was nothing. A heartbeat, a moment between moments. But for Jim and Lyra, that year contained lifetimes. Every morning coffee, every shared meal, every quiet evening watching stars, every choice to stay when leaving would be easier, every decision to build instead of retreat, every moment of vulnerability and trust and the slow, patient work of healing. Somewhere above them, beyond Earth's atmosphere, the galaxy turned in its endless dance. Species met and clashed and occasionally found common ground. The integration continued, imperfect and messy and necessary. And in a small house in the Arizona desert, two people who'd both thought their stories were over-discovered, that sometimes the best chapters came after you thought you'd reached the end. Jim picked up his guitar as the sun climbed higher, fingers finding the melody that had been growing in his mind. It started soft, building into something stronger. Not quite joy, not quite peace, but something that encompassed both. Lyra began to move, her hybrid body catching the light and transforming it into subtle shimmer and grace. Her dance had evolved, becoming something uniquely hers. Not Vexari, not human, something new. They created together, music and movement intertwining, and in that creation was the answer to every question they'd faced. About belonging, about identity, about whether love could bridge impossible gaps. The answer was yes. Always yes. When he set down the guitar, Lyra settled beside him, her head on his shoulder, her breathing synchronized with his. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me permission to transform. For standing with me through the fear and uncertainty. For being brave enough to try again when trying again meant risking everything." Jim kissed the top of her head, feeling the subtle warmth that was neither too hot nor too cold, but perfectly right. "Thank you for choosing me, for seeing past the broken parts to whatever was still worth loving." We're all broken, James. The question is whether we let it define us or transform us. And what did it transform us into? Something better, something capable of love despite knowing exactly how much it costs. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the red rocks, Jim thought about the 6 years he'd spent in isolation. The guitar played to ghosts, the careful avoidance of anything that might make him feel again. He'd thought he was protecting himself, thought that surviving was enough. Lyra had taught him different, had shown him that surviving was just the beginning. That true courage wasn't avoiding pain, but choosing connection despite knowing pain was inevitable. Sarah would have approved, he thought, would have been glad that he'd found a way to live instead of just exist. The thought no longer carried guilt, just gratitude for what had been and what was becoming. Lyra's shimmer slowly faded as she settled into an afternoon nap, the desert heat making her drowsy. Jim watched the light patterns dim and thought about stars, about how they burned across impossible distances, bringing light to darkness through nothing more than the stubborn refusal to let distance define what was possible. He pulled Lyra closer, felt her settle against him with the trust that came from choosing and being chosen. And in that small house, in that vast desert, under stars that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations, two people who'd both lost everything found something worth the risk of trying again. Found each other. Found home.